What's going on, guys? Got a little bit of an update for you concerning a video that I put on the channel about 4 years ago or so on how to reduce moisture in your air compressor. And for those of you guys with really short attention spans who can't watch a video for more than 15 or 20 seconds, here's the quick spoiler alert. You're going to want to add a water separator in between the cooler and the tank. And there you go. You can click on to the next video if you want. But for those who want to stick around, I do want to address some of the comments that I get on that video from time to time, as it has become one of the more watched and certainly one of the most commented on videos on my channel. So first things first, probably the most common comment that I get on that video is that it could have been much shorter. I talked too much, fast forward to this point or watch between here and here if you want the pertinent information. Yeah, that's all well and good. You guys are right. I can't argue with you. I could have probably condensed that down to a little bit of a shorter video. But then again, at the end of the day, that probably says more about you guys than it does about me. I mean, here in this TikTok and Instagram and, quick click social media culture, I get it. Time is valuable. But if you can't watch a 10 or 20-minute video without losing your mind because it was too long, again, that probably says more about you than me. And like I always say, this content is worth exactly how much you paid for it, which, 99.9% of the time is absolutely nothing. So, that's all I'll say about that. Moving on to the second most common comment, we kind of already addressed. A lot of guys said, you were really close on this, but you really need to add a separator after the cooler or before the tank. And yeah, I'll agree with you guys. I actually added this not too much longer after I made that video, after I kind of thought about it a little bit longer. And this wasn't some new revelation for me. This was actually something I debated on doing from the beginning, whether you want to believe that or not. I just initially viewed it as one more potential failure point, which actually did ultimately end up being. I'll say more about that in a moment. But at the end of the day, you guys aren't wrong. The people that suggested that, it is a worthwhile addition. It does add more efficiency to the system, and I will agree. It's not a bad idea to add one of these. The biggest disclaimer I can give, though, is buy a quality separator. Don't cheap out like I did on my first one. Don't buy the cheapest one you can find at Amazon or your local big box store. Spend a little money. I think I spent about 45 or 50 bucks on that one. It'll last much longer. The problem I ultimately ended up having was that cheap one I bought had become extremely brittle in a pretty short amount of time. That inside bulb ruptured, it fractured during one of the fill cycles. And I just happened to have been lucky enough to be coming out into the shop shortly after that must have happened. I was able to shut the power off to the compressor because what ends up happening, as you could well imagine, with a big wide opening, between your head and your tank, that tank is never going to fill up. That pressure switch is never going to satisfy. And that head, that compressor is going to keep on running and running and running until, one of three things happen. Either you're going to find it and shut it off. Either your motor is going to trip out on thermal overload, which is, maybe not the worst case scenario, but certainly not ideal. Or worst case, that head just keeps running and running until it gets so hot that the cylinders start scoring up and everything, melts down and kind of catastrophically fails. And then you're left needing a new head or, rebuilding the old head and, possibly even having to replace a motor, depending on how that ends up. So, keep that in mind. It is, again, a potential failure point. Just keep it inspected. It's probably not a bad idea even to replace it every couple of years just to replace it. There are elements in here that don't last forever anyway, as far as the filter and the, water separating mechanism inside there. So they should probably be replaced from time to time anyhow. You guys can look up the schedules for those. I don't know them off the top of my head, but, not a bad idea to kind of keep up on that. Now, is there any safety mechanism you could add to prevent a catastrophic failure if this were to blow up? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. That's something I'd have to think about a little more deeply. But one thing you can do It doesn't cost anything. Shut your compressor off, cut the power to it at the end of the day when you're done in the shop. I do recommend a shut-off valve here, between the tank and your supply output, just to keep what air is already inside there, because I don't care how big your system is, if it's just a single hose fitting or multiple drops, you're going to have leaks regardless, little micro leaks. And eventually your compressor is going to want to cycle and kick on when you're not there, when you're not using it. And, anything could happen. And it might not even be a failure of the separator. It might be one of these lines rupture. It might be the pressure switch fails. There's any number of things that could happen, that isn't any good for these compressors. So, just bear that in mind. So that's all I'll say about that. Another comment I get is people getting really worried about using copper or, God forbid, these braided, high pressure hoses. Trust me, they're both well within any burst rating or any pressures that this compressor is ever going to make or see. Temperature ratings, all that. I've ran hundreds, if not thousands, of cycles through both of these. 0 leaks, 0 problems. Keep in mind, the lines that were originally there, they're just thin-walled aluminum anyway. So the copper is not going to be much worse, and that's assuming that it's not even a little bit better. Again, I've had no issues with it. One thing I might do differently, just if I had this all to do over again, maybe I'd run copper instead of this line. I'd just run copper, from here to the tank. The hose I already had, it was just more convenient. I would probably not recommend a hose for that top line just because it does get so hot as that compressed air is coming through there and down into the cooler. I'm trying to remember, I might have actually originally had a hose on there that did burst or fail. Copper is definitely the better option all around. Maybe aluminum if you want to go that route. It's probably going to be a little bit harder to, bend and a little bit more expensive, but you've got some options there. But yeah, all of which are well within any pressure ratings that they're ever going to see. And again, I've had no issues, from the start there. So that's what I'll say about that. Now, other comments I get is about the Army Navy versus JIC, the different flares. I added a lot of that info, just to have it. It's really not anything that anybody needs to be really worried about. For the most part, for this application, it's all interchangeable. Don't worry about the acronyms. If you can find only one or both or the other of each, use what you can find. Just make sure your fittings are tight and you'll be fine. 45 versus 60-degree flares, that's not a big deal. Again, as long as your fittings are tight, you'll be fine there as well. For our practical purposes, there's really not enough of a difference to even make note of. So, use what you can, and that should work just fine for you. And I think I mentioned this in the original video. At the very least, make sure you do put a separator after the tank, but between your supply outlet. That should probably go without saying. I think that's probably even more important than having this guy or not. You want one here as well. Because no matter what you do, there's always going to be some moisture in your tank. And that's even if you have a multi-$1,000, dryer desiccant system with a refrigeration, the compressor and, all kinds of other gadgets and gizmos. You're never going to completely eliminate moisture from accumulating in that tank. There's just no way. You still want to drain, your bottom blowdown valve from time to time. They do make auto blowdown, mechanisms you could attach to there. They have timers on them. They range all over in price. I think one of the cheaper ones you probably get for probably $100 or less. But, throw one of those on there if you're really worried about it. You could set the timer anywhere from like every 30 seconds to every hour, I think. Lots of options there. Feel free to look into those. I think it's a little bit overkill, at least for how much I use this compressor. And lastly, I'll just show you, this is how much water I just drained out of the system after, maybe almost a year. It's definitely been a few months at the very least. It's, about a quarter to a third of a cup of water, which as far as I'm concerned, is negligible. And with the 2 dryers there, I mean, my supply air coming out of my tools, my guns, it's pretty much as dry as it's ever going to be. So I think this is a worthwhile modification, worthwhile investment. Again, if I could change anything about that original video, other than maybe shorten it up a little bit, just add that separator after the cooler. You know, does it still work without one? Is it still an improvement? Yes, but that definitely is a no-brainer. Go ahead and add that, and you will see some improvement on that. And one more thing I will mention, this is an auto drainer, auto bleeder. I recommend getting one of those. So basically, when this thing kicks on, this seals up. It'll fill with a little bit of water. And then when that compressor head stops running, this will just drain itself, drip out onto the floor, and pretty quickly evaporate, so you don't even have to worry about that. And that at least leaves it to where you don't forget to drain it and, you know, start blowing water directly into your system after it fills up. So definitely recommend the auto bleeders. If you do have an auto bleeder on your supply, you know, between your tank and your hoses, just keep in mind, these only bleed once the pressure is relieved. So every once in a while, you do want to valve everything off and, you know, just make sure it bleeds off to get some of that water out there. Or again, you will have moisture going through into your lines. So keep that in mind. Open those back up, and or you can walk by and just blow it down, you know, with the valves on. But just keep in mind and remember how those work. And again, just understand they can and do fail from time to time. So, you know, be sure you're aware of that and how to mitigate those consequences. So that's it, guys. This one's maybe a little shorter than that first video. Hopefully I gave you the most pertinent info up front. For those that stuck around, I do appreciate the support. And as far as all the comments, I really appreciate those. I appreciate the engagement. I appreciate the views. You know, whether you agree with me or not, or, you know, whether your comments are a little snarky or, you know, on the less than friendly side, you know, that really doesn't bother me at all. And in fact, I usually laugh a little bit at them just because, you know, people often think they know a little bit more than they really do. And maybe myself, I could fall into that category as well. But, you know, trust me, this is all tried and true. I've been around the block a couple of times here. And, you know, this is certainly better than nothing. So with that being said, guys, keep the comments coming, good, bad, or otherwise. Keep that engagement up. Keep those views coming. I appreciate every single one of them. And as always, I'll see you guys on the next one. And maybe we'll do another update about 4 years from now for this one. I'll see you guys.